Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. To date, there are 145 episodes of AA Recovery Interviews. I invite you to listen to them all at my website, aarecoveryinterviews.com. They're also available on all podcast apps. Every episode is unique, inspiring, engaging, and meaningful. Each story is a powerful testimony of the recovery available to all in AA. Today is an encore episode of my interview with Ernie G., originally broadcast in July 2021. This is the 35th interview in my podcast series and features my longtime friend Ernie G. His story is a fascinating excursion into a high-class lifestyle of fast cars, flashy clothes, and glittery nightclubs, all underwritten by a high-paying day job and cocaine dealing on the side. As his alcohol and cocaine use turned into alcoholism and drug addiction, all accountability to career, family, and friends evaporated. His risky behavior escalated until he was arrested in a DEA sting and jailed in federal prison. When he got out, he managed to avoid cocaine, aided by increasing use of alcohol. Meanwhile, his marriage and parenthood suffered irreparably. Separation from his wife and daughter soon occurred and culminated in divorce. Left alone and still addicted, Ernie returned to his nightclubs every night of the week to find relief, but those days were gone. Incomprehensible demoralization was hastening his demise until his moment of clarity during a visit to his largest business client, who also paid for Ernie's inpatient treatment. From there, 3 AA members, including his present-day sponsor, pulled Ernie into a program of hard work, prayer, and service. His relationships with his daughter and ex-wife finally began to heal. Today, nearly 16 years later, he is still sober, and his life reflects the willingness of a man who unconditionally allowed the grace of God and the program of AA to change his life. There's a lot more of Ernie's story that you're going to enjoy, some with which you may identify. Like all my other interviews, it's both unique and entertaining, while conveying the serious message of possibilities and hope available in Alcoholics Anonymous. So, enjoy listening to this episode of AA Recovery Interviews with my friend and AA brother, Ernie G.
I'm Ernie. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Ernie.
Hi, Howard.
I'm so glad you could do this morning, and I'm so happy that we were able to arrange this. I know we've been looking at our schedules and trying to match things up, so this is really special. You know, I first met you, Ernie, I guess it was when you had been sober maybe, 6 months maybe? Or does that sound about right?
Randy's my sponsor, and Randy's been taking me to the Saints meeting and the Sunday night meeting since I got sober, almost week 1, week 2.
I remember those first few weeks and months of your sobriety. One of the things that really impressed me about you at that time was that you were in the process, I believe, of raising a daughter, or you had a daughter at that point that you were essentially raising, and that's pretty extraordinary for a man to be raising a child in the early days of sobriety, and it really impressed me. Can you tell me how that worked at that time?
Yes. So I was released from my inpatient treatment center, and George had requested that both my sponsor, Randy, and my great-grand sponsor, Stephen M., come to my house and do an inspection for drugs and alcohol, and do an inspection for contraband to make sure the house was clean. And so...
Did they have an AA search warrant? That's what I want to know.
Well, I'll tell you what, they missed something pretty important. They did come and spent a whole Saturday morning going through my house and clearing out the debris. God gave me 2 serious tests during my sobriety. I think there's a second test I'll mention later. I will tell you this, that the guys came in and did an inspection for contraband, and several months later, a little bindle of cocaine fell out of book or something at some point,
Sure.
which was an early test. But the reason I bring any of this up was you asked me about my being a father in early sobriety and what that was about. And it all stems from Stephen M., who was a father and, as luck would have it, had a daughter the same age as my daughter.
Oh, wow.
And when he came to my house and he saw how I was living, he was really disgusted and very unhappy.
Uh-huh.
And what he said to me on that Saturday morning is, it's time to be a man, Ernie, and I need you to get a maid over here first thing Monday morning to clean up this house because you are a father of a young lady and this house needs to be in impeccable order and it needs to be a clean house for your daughter. Number one. Number two, you're a married man. I need you to cause no further damage with your wife. I said, how do I do that? He says, mostly just keep your mouth shut and make sure your wife and your daughter have the money they need to survive and live off of. And number three, and this is most important, you will always do what's in the best interest of your daughter. And he was pointing his finger in my face. He was pissed off.
I'll bet.
I was really fortunate. I had Stephen and Bobby J at a weekday men's meeting at 7 a.m. that I went to. And Stephen repeated that mantra to me umpteen times. You will cause no further damage with your wife, and you will do what's in the best interest of your daughter. And so that probably had a lot to do with me bringing up the fact that I was a father, in early sobriety.
Yeah, now, so when we're talking about early sobriety, how long have you been sober? What's your sobriety date?
My sobriety date is August 2nd, 2005.
Okay, so you're coming up on 16 years?
16 years on the 2nd.
Very, very cool. Well, I know Bobby J, and I've gone to meetings with him for years. I have not recently so much, but in the early days certainly, and Stephen M. as well, and also Randy M. And those three fellows, just between the three of them, are like they're amazing with the way they work their program and the no-nonsense approach. Now, you mentioned your wife. Were you guys still married at that point?
Yes, we were still married. My wife, having grown tired of my act, had moved out with my daughter.
So you were separated?
We were separated, that's correct.
So you were separated when Randy took you to your first meetings of AA?
Correct. I was separated when I went into the rehab facility.
How long were you in rehab for?
I was inpatient for a couple of weeks. And then, did the outpatient thing for the prescribed period, whatever that was, 4 weeks or like.
Your exposure to AA, was that prior to or during or after your inpatient experience?
After my inpatient experience. I had heard of AA a few times prior to going to rehab. But I don't know. I had no idea there was any solution to my problem. I really didn't know.
I'm familiar with the treatment center that you went to, and I know that they have inside meetings. They've got an alumni group that does AA in that particular facility. So you were exposed to AA to some extent before you even got out, and then you did your IOP once you were out in conjunction with AA?
Yes, so once I was in my IOP, I was released on a Monday. 2 days later, on that Wednesday, which was supposed to be my first day with my daughter.
Yeah.
I was supposed to have my daughter that night.
Yeah.
And Randy called me on Wednesday and said, Ernie, there's an incredible men's meeting tonight that I really strongly urge you to attend. In fact, I need you to be at this meeting. And I thanked Randy for the suggestion and told him, yes, I really like to go, but tonight's my night, with my daughter, and she needs me, and I need to be there for her. And Randy said, "What your daughter needs is a sober man." I really, really think you should come to this meeting and make arrangements to see her on another night.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can see that still kind of chokes you up to think back to that, huh?
It does. And at the time, it angered me that he was telling me that the meeting, trumped. And I wanted to curse him. I may have, I don't know, but But I went to the meeting.
Huh. So by that point, you and your wife were separated, but you had it worked out when you would get to see your daughter?
Yes, I had it worked out, and I don't think it was, I don't know if it was a legal separation or not. I don't recall. I don't think so. We were just kind of working it out.
I see.
She was mad as a hornet, of course, and wasn't too sympathetic. And I missed my daughter's first day of school because I was in rehab.
Oh. How old was she?
She was in kindergarten, so 5 or 6.
So what had things gotten like in your behavior that led up to the separation? What kind of things were you doing, and when did the bottom start to fall out?
Basically, it was my comings and goings. Coming home super late, not at all, that kind of stuff. Not being where I'm supposed to be, those sorts of things. And it was one of those weekends where I was supposed to go on a trip that I never took. I just hung around so I could, party, without any accountability. And one of my wife's friends spotted me about town and let her know that I was in town. I was supposed to be in Vegas playing a poker tournament. That was the catalyst for her moving out. That was the final straw.
Had she suspected anything or called you on the carpet on any of your behavior prior to that?
I'm sure she did. We partied together. We were a pretty good team. The difference being you could go out and have a good time with friends for the most part and not have to continue on. She's not an addict of my variety, that sort of thing.
I get it. So you mentioned the word addict. Which substance was the prevailing for you?
Oh, cocaine. Yeah, cocaine. Cocaine brought me lots of trouble. It culminated in a rehab, but that wasn't my first. There were problems before that.
Were there?
Yeah, there were.
When did the problems first start?
I guess the problems with consequences happened in Dallas in the mid-'80s. I found I could gain lots of popularity by peddling the substance, and that culminated with me eventually getting locked up for a long while.
So you were dealing cocaine when you were up there. Was that mostly to support your own using, or was that how you were making your income?
No, I had a full-time professional job that was fairly well-paying job. It was more about popularity in nightclubs. That was the driving force. I was more passionate about my nightclubs than I was about my own career.
Yeah, cocaine has a way of doing that to people, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, they kind of go hand in hand. And
it moves you off the trajectory that you might have been on. It's
a horrible drug, and what I like to tell particularly the young guys that I work with is don't sabotage your life like I did myself. I feel like I started sabotaging my life when I was 13.
Yeah. So when you were 13, what was the sabotaging that was going on, and what led up to that sabotaging? Was it something that occurred in your family of origin?
I've had some discussions around that topic too, because unlike many people, I don't feel like I have those sorts of family issues that may drive people to want to escape. Rather than, I was super popular in school all the way through. And I was a jock, and I was good at sports. I'm 5'9", and I was 5'9" when I was 12. So it gave me a big advantage in sports.
Yeah, I'll bet.
And so I was very, very popular in school, and when I got to junior high school, in California, junior high school starts in 7th grade. So it goes 7th, 8th, and 9th. So I got to 7th grade, and I was very popular. But that wasn't enough. There was a group called the Stoners.
The Stoners, yeah.
Stoners. And so for some reason, I wanted to gain some popularity. I wanted to join that group. So I did join that group, so to speak. And that's when I started smoking pot. At my junior high school, there was a designated smoking area. And there was even a yard lady there, but it was mostly a cigarette smoking, pot smoking area. I never smoked cigarettes until much later in my life, but That's when I started smoking pot. That was the gateway, so to speak.
Was that something that other jocks were doing, or was the smoking pot and the moving over to the stoners group, did that pull you away from or separate you from the jocks? Did you go from being a jock to being a stoner, or were you able to maintain both identities?
I was able to maintain both identities, but none of the other jocks were stoners at that point. By the time I got to high school, that had changed, but in 7th grade, it was just me. All the jocks were pretty straight-laced people. Yeah, it was just me. So I was able to maintain both, but my friendships changed. I stopped hanging around like after school with the jocks and started hanging around with the stoners.
And smoking pot, as I recall from my own experience, made me less ambitious about the things I had passion for prior to smoking pot. Did your interest in being a jock wane as a result of your hanging with the stoners and smoking pot?
No, I love sports. Going back to when I was, as soon as I could read, about 3rd or 4th grade, 9 or 10, I would race my father to the sports page every morning at 6 a.m. and read it cover to cover, and then I read the front page. I love sports, so no, it did not affect my love for sports or my participation. I played in all the sports all the way through school. But what it did do is wane my passion a little bit for school. I was in a star math class. But I remember in 7th grade, I went from the star math class. I dropped down one level just to make my life easier, so I could party more, be more social. That was that. Yeah. So so partially, to answer your question, yeah.
Well, I've heard that a lot from the people I've interviewed, that they were good students up to a point, and then they started getting involved in alcohol and drugs, and it moved them off the mark. Some it didn't. Some were still able to. I mean, I was able to excel academically, even though I was smoking pot all the time. What role did alcohol play in your early pot smoking days?
Sure, yeah. So, both my parents were alcoholics. And we had a fully stocked bar in our house, cases of everything, vodka, scotch, bourbon. They buy it by the case. And so drinking was accepted and normal in my household. And the rule was, it's okay to have a drink as long as it's in the house.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty casual in my house. So I think that was sort of an early catalyst, for drinking. And I remember my very, very first bad episode with alcohol. I was in 7th grade. I went to the 7th grade dance, and I poured. I got a 16-ounce bottle of a Coke bottle, filled it up with vodka, pure vodka. And I pretty much chugged the whole thing between my house and the time I got to the dance. And it was at some point at the dance, I realized I was like just really, really drunk. And I ran all the way home. It was a long run, several miles, 2 or 3 miles from the dance to my house, snuck it back into my house, and then threw my guts up big time, just horrible. And it was such a horrible memory experience that I didn't drink vodka again until I was in my late 30s. So I was 13. That's how bad it scarred me. I'm pretty sure I drank the next weekend. I just switched it to something different.
So like a lot of people, you had a terrible first experience, but yet you couldn't wait to do it again.
Couldn't wait to do it again. Couldn't wait to change the way I feel.
So you were hanging with people who were drinking and smoking. You were still participating in sports, and academically you were still doing pretty good. Were there any signs that you were starting to have a problem with that, or it was causing problems, or what kind of consequences were occurring while you were in junior high and high school that might have pointed to there being a bigger problem with drugs and alcohol?
There were actually no consequences during my junior or high school years. I always had a goal of getting A's in the courses that I cared about and at least B's in the courses I didn't. And I knew I wanted to go to college.
Sure.
So I was able to keep those targets and do that. One thing that, looking back, is that we used to go to all these parties, and I used to get in these brawls, these fights all the time. Because one of my friends, he was an Irish guy who couldn't drink, and I created a little joke with him. He used to joke to me about the shortest book ever written, and he called it, the book on Italian war heroes, because I'm Italian.
Right.
So I had a counter joke. I said, well, That book is about as short as Great Irish Drinkers. He was a bad alcoholic. He passed away. He was my first friend who OD'd on drugs and alcohol.
Oh.
He would get us in a fight almost every single Friday night. I mean, like hundreds of fights. So that would be the indication that there was a problem. All the fights, all the brawls. So that was the sign for sure. But like nobody knew about it. You know, I never got messed up. I never got any broken arms and legs or cuts in my face and stuff per se. And so,
did you ever get arrested for that? Did your folks ever find out?
Yeah. No, but you triggered a memory, Howard, that I had forgot about. In 7th grade, we were smoking pot at Pioneer Park, and some cops came up and arrested us. And there was no consequence of that. I don't recall if it was a court thing or if the cops just brought us home and told our parents, you know, back in those days, things were a little different. But other than that, no DWIs, no car crashes, no car accidents. I had friends who crashed their cars into tree stumps drunk. That, you know, happened a lot in a few times in high school, stuff like that. But
Yeah, so you were one of those charmed alcoholic drug addicts, I like to call them, that were able to get away with all of that behavior without DWIs, without getting arrested, without the consequences. And it sounds like you had umpteen opportunities to get in trouble, but you didn't. Did that influence the way you felt about the impunity with which you used drugs and alcohol?
That's a really good point. The way I viewed myself, you know, post-college is, you know, here, I'm a young master of the universe. I make 6 figures. I work hard and I play hard. I got, I dress in nice clothes and I've got fancy friends. And how could I have a problem? How could I be doing all that if I had a problem?
Yeah, so you continued that behavior, you said, through college. Did it deviate very much from the kind of behavior you had in high school? Were you fighting as much? Were you getting drunk and stoned as much or more? So what were the kind of groups you were hanging with in college, and how did they influence your later behavior?
Yeah, college was pretty standard, drinking, after intramurals games and, with the guys in the dorm and that sort of stuff. And, but here's the thing I discovered. I realized fairly early on in the game, I really didn't like pot. It made me paranoid. And so I actually sort of just slowly but surely started smoking less and less pot, started turning down the bong hits because I didn't like the way it made me feel.
Sure, I get that.
The pot smoking waned just, every year it just got less and less and less until I finally came to the point that I hate pot. And I would make this comment even right before rehab. You could put a bale of hydro in my living room, come back in 1 year, and there wouldn't be 1 gram missing because I just didn't like the drug.
Yeah. Did the moving away from pot move you more towards alcohol or other substances?
Yeah. So there was no cocaine in college. It wasn't on the radar. It was really, really expensive.
Yeah.
I started working at a nightclub my senior year in high school, and there was a drug dealer there. And so, sometimes he'd front me a little bit, and I would be able to sell a little bit so I could afford some myself. That's where cocaine started creeping in a little bit. Probably like the senior year in college. But I would study at the library until about 10, 11 o'clock, and I'd go out almost every night. But it was just it was mostly just drinking. I wasn't really a sloppy drunk per se.
Yeah, that's interesting. So once again, you lived the charmed life of an alcoholic through your college, but now cocaine is looming. Was it exclusively snorting cocaine? You weren't doing anything with crack or mainlining or anything like that, were you?
No, I wasn't. There was something called freebase, which is crack before crack was crack. And there was a few stints of that. After college, I went back to San Francisco, and then from San Francisco, moved to Dallas. And then Dallas is where things really blasted off, the cocaine. And there was some freebase. It was kind of a hard thing to do and cook it up. And so I was a snorting guy.
So you mentioned going back to San Francisco and then coming back to Dallas. And you'd mentioned earlier about dealing cocaine up in Dallas and also being arrested and going to jail. How many years after you were out of college was all that going on?
Oh, yes. About 4 or 5 years after college.
Okay, so you're working in your career 4 or 5 years after you were selling selling dope on the side. What were the circumstances under which you were arrested and went to jail?
Yes, so it probably saved my life, but what happened was I was living in Dallas, and me and my girlfriend, and we were going to nightclubs, and we lived for nightclubs. I've always lived for nightclubs. I've moved cities for nightclubs. I moved from San Francisco to Dallas for nightclubs. The Dallas nightclub scene was way better than San Francisco. It wasn't even close.
Yeah.
And then I decided to move to LA for a nightclub. I was living in Dallas, and I took a job in LA to go to that nightclub scene. And then my boss said, why don't you go to New York? Right. You can stay at the same company. And New York's got better nightclubs than Dallas. So I said, yeah, that's a good idea. And I won't have to switch jobs. So I reneged on a job that I had accepted in LA and stayed with the company I was working for and took a job in New York. And I had a little entourage. You know, we were wheeling and dealing cocaine, you know, and I knew everybody at the nightclub. When I pulled up to the nightclub, the sea would part. But anyway, I was moving to New York. So life was going to change. And so I'm in New York for 6 weeks waiting to get an apartment. And then I get the apartment. The movers are coming to get our stuff in Dallas. I go back to Dallas to wait for the movers. It was like a 2-day thing.
Yeah.
And my entourage had arranged for one last deal. And it turned out that deal was with the DEA.
Huh. Had they been following you for a while?
Yes. It's so funny, Howard. You know, you'd say to yourself, because when you're doing coke, you get paranoid. And you say, you know, those weren't two G-men in a suit walking in the parking lot of my garage. It couldn't be following that. And then one day I was driving out of my apartment in Dallas. I come up and I stop and I look both ways. And there's a guy on the other side of the street snapping a picture of me in my Corvette as I'm pulling out. I'm like, that guy couldn't be taking a picture of me. And even on the day we got busted, I said, that cannot be a helicopter trailing us around the city of Dallas. Oh, yes, it could. it was, you know. And so. Oh,
my gosh.
You think, I'm just being paranoid. And guess what? I wasn't.
Right.
I wasn't paranoid.
Right.
Yeah, so I went back and we were set up by the DEA, and it's, you know, how 5 of us got arrested and 5 of us ended up going to jail. Yeah.
Wow. So what kind of sentence did you get from that?
5 years with 3 years special parole. I'll give you a little fun fact. So I went to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, and it's a very impressive prison. The gutters are made out of copper, and the scales of justice are imprinted on these copper gutters every 3 feet. I think Al Capone may have stayed there. It was a pretty impressive place. But I had a good job. I was being a white collar guy. I got to work for the warden. That's where I worked, you know, during the day and, you know, did paperwork, for the warden. So it wasn't bad. Wasn't bad at all. Worked out every day. Read 1 million books.
So you were the Shawshank Redemption guy, huh? Working for the warden?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So how long did you spend actually behind bars?
About 30 months. Then I was paroled to New York City. We had moved to New York, and, you know, it was kind of funny how even that happened. So, you know, we got busted in Dallas. And I hired like one of the top criminal attorneys in all of Dallas. And all the money I had made, you know, wheeling and dealing, I gave him. And he got me no true bill. You know, we were indicted by the state of Texas. And so I'm living in New York thinking everything is pretty cool. And then about 1 year later, I get called up to the HR department. And I really thought I was going to get a promotion because I was doing pretty well. And I get up there, and it was the 2 same DEA agents that arrested me 1 year earlier. I had been indicted federally.
Ouch.
And my attorney had actually told me that could happen, and it did. So what you learn is pretty damn easy to, if you hire attorneys and spend money to get off a state deal, almost impossible to get off a federal deal, no matter what. My dad had told me a long time ago, I'm too old to go to jail. Because I told my dad what I was doing. He said, I'm too old to go to jail. Right. And he says, they're smarter than you and they got more resources, you know. And he was right.
Yeah. So what was the outcome of that federal case?
Yes. And, you know, so I went back and, you know, we were watching Miami Vice a lot back during those days. And I thought it was Don Johnson. I had a Don Johnson jacket. I mean, almost exactly the same as his. I drove a black Corvette. And we still, you know, we'd watch, you know, Miami Vice, and then we'd go out partying. And so I thought I was done. And that was my downfall, because I had a sawed-off shotgun in my car, and they used that as leverage to get me to. Said you might be able to bullshit your way out of the drug thing, because I didn't get caught. My entourage got busted, not me. So you might be able to shake that. You're not going to be able to shake this gun that was in your car. So I ended up pleading guilty and got that 5-year sentence.
Okay, so that was another 5-year sentence, or that was the original sentence you're talking about?
That was the original. That was the original. Yeah, because the first one, the state beef, I was looking from 0 to 99. Texas is not a place to get busted for drugs. I was looking up the maximum 5 to 99. It was pretty hellacious. But again, no true bill. So I got off the state indictment.
You were off the state indictment and moved right into the federal indictment.
Yeah, federal, yeah. And so
30 months behind bars, you're paroled. Did that experience in prison, did that change your thinking about what you had been doing? Did it make you want to stop doing it? Or from an addiction standpoint, did you still feel that you were addicted while you were serving your time? What did that look like?
As funny as this may sound, I never thought I was addicted. What did I learn from that experience? I learned I didn't want to be in jail. So what did I learn? I learned not to sell drugs. That was crystal clear. I learned that lesson really well. Never again, not selling drugs, not doing that. And so I just wanted to get out of there as quick as possible and resume my life. And then when I got out, I was on parole. And parole in New York City was no big deal. The guy was so busy, he didn't even have time to worry about me. But then I moved to Houston about a year later, and when I got to Houston, the parole officer, Rocky P, he used to show up at my apartment at 8 o'clock in the morning and piss test me, or show up at work and random piss test me. So now I could drink. Wow. There was no rule against drinking. There was just no drugs.
Right.
So the entire time while I was on parole, I never used drugs ever until I was on special parole for 5 years. I went 4 years and 11 months without using any drugs. On the 12th month of the 4th year, I was at a nightclub, and I finally broke down and used some coke and had to sweat out a piss test. Because with special parole, you come back and do the whole thing. They can make you do the whole thing over. But during my parole, I drank, but no drugs and no DWIs. To this day, I never got a DWI. Luckily, of course.
That's amazing. So while you were in prison and after you got out, you never acknowledged a drug problem. You acknowledged a drug selling problem.
Correct. Nobody ever suggested I get help, do a 12-step program. That was never suggested to me, anybody at all. Or if it was, it may have been very briefly. It wasn't nobody family-wise or girlfriend-wise or...
Yeah. Were they bringing AA behind bars at all at that time? Did you notice?
I don't know. Probably.
Yeah. One of my earliest guests, Tom D., got sober in prison and was sober for 20 years before he got out. And his is an amazing story, but he credits AA in prison with saving his life. You got out, and so you went back to behavior. Instead of going back to cocaine immediately, you waited till the very end of your parole to do it. What was the outcome? Did you get caught again, or what was next after that?
Yeah, so after that, I just was working pretty hard, got my license, playing a lot of golf. I was like a four-trick pony. Work, go to the gym, play golf, and go nightclubbing. That was my four-trick pony. Those were my four passions, and I did them all really, really well. This is while I was in Houston, and so what I'll say about drinking, all the way through, all my buddies drank, and so a fair amount of drinking. Cocaine use, it was only as available. It wasn't none of my friends did cocaine, and so hit and miss. It was but if you look back, it was probably a pretty slow acceleration here and there, a little here and there more, and just it kind of started snowballing. And then when I met my wife, we started partying pretty good, and then it really amped up quite a bit.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying listening to my AA Recovery Interviews podcast, check out my latest audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the 3rd and 4th editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the 3rd and 4th editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as they were when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. Have a free listen to Lost Stories of the Big Book on Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. It's also available as a Kindle book and in paperback from Amazon. While you're there, treat yourself to another audiobook I produced, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first printing of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a comfortable, meaningful, and engaging way to listen to the Big Book, anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. You're going to love it. And we're back. Did your alcohol use supplant your use of cocaine during the years that you weren't using cocaine very frequently? Did you drink like a drug addict, or would you not have considered yourself a problem drinker at that time?
Yeah. I had discipline in terms of only drinking at nightclub. I wouldn't be drinking at home alone. That sort of thing. Pre-heavy cocaine use, my drinking was pretty much, limited to nightclubs and after the golf game, that sort of stuff. Looking back on it, the drinking sabotaged my life because, going out nightclubbing and drinking, and then you wake up, you're not full strength the next day for work. I was sabotaging. Yeah. So I'd say, it was probably a substitute for changing the way I feel.
This is the point, I guess, in your story where you met your wife. You met her in a nightclub?
Yes. So I like to say I met her at the gym.
Okay.
Nightclub was more accurate.
So how many years prior to your getting sober had you guys gotten married?
Well, we had been together 10 years before I got sober. We hadn't been married the whole time. We'd been married about half that time.
You guys first got together 26 years ago?
We got together about 95-ish, and I got sober in 2005, right?
So did you just continue on with what you were doing, but now you were with somebody?
Yeah. We like to go out dancing and listening to music. I never thought my ex-wife had a problem because she was never really a big drinker, but she was like the life of the party because she had the personality and she was vivacious and fun, and people liked her and liked us as a couple. So it was more about just, going out and just having a fun time partying. And she liked to dance too. So it was more about dressing up pretty and going out and nightlife,
So Ernie and his girlfriend, or Ernie and his wife, they're beautiful people, they're the life of the party. Is that a pretty accurate description?
That was a pretty good description. All of our friends were of the same sort of ilk, like to dress up, dancing and have fun. So it was, so I think we were just considered part of the fun bunch. What separated us probably from an average couple is we would like to do it every weekend, not just once a month or something like that.
So as we move towards your sobriety date, when did you first notice that the wheels were starting to get a little bit wobbly, and what did you attribute that to?
So during those nightclubbing episodes, finally ran into some people that also liked cocaine as much as I do. And so they, so they had access and knew where to get the cocaine. And so my cocaine use really started to accelerate late 90s. Took a break from that when our daughter was born. We managed to take a year off from partying, and then and sort of kicked back in. Started to take over my life, I would say, around maybe 2003. And I remember exactly what guaranteed I was going to wind up either dead or in rehab or in jail was three things happened. Step one was I went on my own business-wise. I left the company I worked for and started my own practice. So I call that, in terms of accountability, one giant lop of accountability was removed. Step two, my father passed away. So I used to go visit my father 2 or 3 times a week. Yeah. I moved him from San Francisco to Houston, and he lived around the corner, and he had a girlfriend, and I spent a lot of time over there. But he passed away, around age 80. And so that was step 2 of accountability taken away.
So how long were you working on your own when your dad passed?
Maybe a year, something like that. But then I'm really out of control. I was in really, really bad shape for his funeral. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty embarrassing. I look back, but it's so cringeworthy. It was really pathetic. And that reminds me, he was, he's in hospice, and I take off to go party. And he passes away, that next morning. Did the same thing to my mom. It was, 10, 15 years earlier, I went to San Francisco for a party when my mom was basically going into hospice. I mean, we talked about that selfish, self-centered, self-seeking, root of our problem.
Yeah.
I have the isms in spades. Yeah. I think I'm a really good example of the isms being way greater than the actual drink part of it, Drinking was just a symptom of the real problem. And the real problem was just all the stuff that we identify in the big book. Cocaine was way worse. The alcohol was not good, but the isms, my God. And so, I think I tell that story, I bailed on both my parents when they were in hospice situation to party. And so he passes away. And then, so that's 2 out of 3 accountability. I was in bad shape by my dad's funeral. And at that time period, I was like out of control. Some time period after that's when my wife left me. And then I had no accountability whatsoever. And then it just took me 6 to 12 months to wind up in rehab.
Did you know she was going to be leaving? Has she threatened to leave on certain occasions, or did it take you completely by surprise, or was it something that you knew about deep down but weren't able to really admit to yourself? I
think it caught me by surprise. I was becoming quite the jerk and horrible father and husband, just thinking about myself. But it did catch me by surprise. I didn't think she would do it.
Did she move out, or did she kick you out?
She moved out, yeah.
She did. Wow. Do you remember what her parting words or what she told you when she left that sticks with you?
She was just mad as a hornet. So, that final weekend where, I was supposed to be on a trip that I wasn't, that was the final straw. Just like she had it. Final straw. That's just, no, I tried to talk her out of it. No reconsideration. Like, nope, you had it with you. So.
Huh. And that was how long before rehab?
I would say 6 to 12 months. I don't remember exactly.
So you had a period of time in there where your 3-step route to perdition allowed you no accountability to anybody. So did you really go to town at that point, or was the moving out of your wife, did that interfere with that? Yeah,
that was full. I was just full steam ahead, 7 days a week.
Oh.
Not 6, 7. 7 days a week.
7.
Drinking, yeah. And so when anybody who does a lot of coke, you get really high strung and nervous. And so alcohol cuts the edge. So my drinking really ramped up quite a bit that last year to cut the edge. And so I drank so much that, and I knew I didn't want to go back to prison, so I always had either took a taxi or a wrecker home. I used to take the taxi, and then I realized I didn't like not having the car the next morning. So I got smart, and I started having a wrecker take me home every single night. I've always shut the bar down, like every night, 7 days a week. Shut it down 2 a.m., have a wrecker drive me back home, drop me off like a couple houses down because it's loud, clang, clang, clang. I didn't want my next door neighbor to know. So, but I had got to that point where I needed to have a wrecker bring me home every night.
That's pretty ingenious. I like that. I never thought of that. One way to keep. I used to have a friend who said that I've got an absolute fail-safe method for not getting a DWI, and that is don't drive. So he would get all of his arrests for PI, public intoxication. So that's interesting. So what was the moment of truth? What was the actual turning point that you just said, I need help, I gotta do something?
Yeah, it happened the day I went into rehab. So the night before, I remember the night before, July 31st, 2005, it was a Sunday, and so I got up that morning when I woke up late, like I always do, and then went to go see the man, picked up my cocaine, went to my office, and I remember I was playing cards with 2 homeless people in back of my office, a guy and a girl, and we were playing some cards. I'm a card player, and and I remember I wouldn't give him any of my drugs, but I gave him alcohol, and I was I was very lonely. I was just super, super lonely, and then I went home and I was lonely, so I went to a nightclub. And I had a female friend who didn't have any romantic interest in me, but I talked her into letting me spend the night at her house that night. And I had a business meeting the next morning at 7 a.m. early. And so I brought my suit, and I met my business partner at my biggest client's office at 7 a.m. And we walked up in my business, and Tommy said to my partner, can I have a moment with Ernie? And he pulled me into his office and said, "Say, I've been acting really, really strangely this last year or two, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And it finally dawned on me. Do you have a monkey on your back?" And I just started crying my ass off, because I had that, that the book talks about, that demoralization. And I had that loneliness and demoralization that, few men feel. I was there. I had that, I was just really, really sad and lonely. And I just started crying and said, yes. He goes, "Do you want help?" And I said, yes. And he said, good. He called up his insurance agent, who recommended a facility for us to go to. He drove me to the facility and wrote a check for $15,000 for work I hadn't done yet, so I could go into that facility and get help.
Wow. Now this is your client who's doing this for you.
This is my client. I call him my guardian angel.
Sounds like it. That's amazing. What a neat moment of truth to go in and see your largest client who, did you believe all along he never thought you had a problem? I mean, did you feel like you were getting away with it the whole time he was a client of yours?
He's a really smart guy. I really suspected, he knew something was up, and I just thought maybe because he liked me, he was cutting me a little slack. And plus I had a business partner who really was helpful, for, keeping the work of good quality. So,
yeah, it sounds like, so as a guardian angel, he would necessarily know what he was doing. And so he gets you checked in. You were there for 2 weeks, you mentioned earlier, and then you did IOP. Did you do that for 6 weeks after, or how long after?
I don't recall the prescribed period, 4 weeks, 6 weeks. It was quite a while, but I did that faithfully. I did everything by the book. I was really, it was a miracle. That was a God thing. That God, the one thing I tell my sponsees is I've done two things really, really well. When I got, I didn't drink. Number one, most foremost. Number two, I really surrendered really well. If you recall, I never heard me say I think. When I got called on at meetings, I would say, I would report, I'm on step one. I'm working with my sponsor, I'm in step one. I didn't really even talk too much. I just reported what step I was on as my sponsor told me to do. So if someone's eating your lunch, tell it. You can go ahead and tell it. But otherwise, just tell them what step you're on.
Yeah, and people won't know what's going on for you if you don't tell them. It's so easy in the 3 to 5 minutes that you have to share in any given meeting to talk about anything but what's really going on. So I really admire that, and that to me demonstrates the real importance of a good fundamental sponsor. I get that. So let me ask you this question, Ernie. Do you think that based on your experience and what you've experienced over the years with AA, do you think you could have gotten sober in AA without going through treatment, or was treatment kind of a vital first step for you to have to go through before you could get to your willingness to engage in AA?
I think I definitely needed treatment. I think I needed to be off the streets for a period of time. That was just so helpful.
I see.
To be check out of life, no phone, no contacts, and really just that break from life. I highly recommend it. Anybody who's given a try to do it on their own, failed once or twice, it's much easier.
So as time has gone on, so you've been sober going on 16 years now, and that's a heck of a long time. Were there times during that period between when you first got sober and came into AA and along the way, or even up to today, that your sobriety was severely tested, or your willingness to stay sober was stretched to its limit? And how did you handle those situations if you had that?
I'll tell you about the biggest test. It happened on a Saturday morning. I drove to the office and no one was there. Parking lot was empty, covered parking, parked my car, went to the trunk, got my briefcase out. I always keep my briefcase in the trunk so it doesn't get stolen. I go into the office, work for an hour, 90 minutes, come back downstairs, go to the trunk, open the trunk, stick the briefcase in the trunk, look down, and I see a giant bindle of cocaine, like an 8-ball worth, a big bindle, sitting right there at my feet.
In the trunk?
Not in the trunk, on the ground. On the ground.
Oh, my gosh.
And I'm thinking, what are the odds that there be this giant bindle, 8-ball of cocaine sitting there, at the foot of my trunk, which I don't think was there when this morning, it seemed so improbable that would happen. And all these thoughts are going through my head. What should I do? What do I do? Do I throw it away? What's the next right thing to do? I was like, just didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. And I had these thoughts, should I call my sponsor? Yeah, I probably should call my sponsor.
How long were you sober at this point?
6 months. And ultimately I decided the best thing to do was to do nothing, drive away and call my sponsor. And that's what I did. I didn't touch it. I just backed up and pulled away. I thought maybe I was being set up, by somebody to get busted. I didn't. I just thought I was being set up somehow, some way. And I just thought the best move was don't touch it. Just drive away, call your sponsor. And that's what I did. I jumped in the car and I called my sponsor.
Did you look around for it the next day?
No. It's I've been lucky. I have the relief that the big book talks about. Recoil like a hot flame. I'd like to. I always mention that today. If God came down to me right now and said, "Hey, Ernie, you just had this great interview with Howard. You're really in a great place. You can resume drinking like a gentleman." I would thank God, for the offer and say no. I don't need to sprinkle anything in my life to make it better. And I have the best family of friends in the whole wide world. I would never want to give that up for anything. There's no substitute for our fellowship. Yeah. It's just the most amazing thing in the world. And so it's such a gift, such an advantage in life, how we walk life together, we do life together. It's just an amazing thing. Yeah. So,
and you're talking about a tandem blessing there is what I hear you saying, the fact that you got through that situation at 6 months, and in the years since, you've recognized the importance of the fellowship and staying close and staying connected. We started out talking about your daughter and the fact that you have a relationship with her that probably would not have been possible without being a sober member of AA. Is that a pretty fair statement?
I didn't know how to be a good father. I didn't know what that looked like. Number one, I was too selfish, self-centered, self-seeking to be a good father. Step one. Step two, I really didn't know the right action moves. But my grand sponsor gets all the credit because he had a daughter, and he showed me exactly step for step what it means to be a good father, a present father, a father who's there for their daughter at all times, a man that their daughter can count on. And so, I tell my young guys, because I really like working with guys who are going through divorces and who have kids, because I was there. Mm-hmm. My ex-wife came to my house 4 days ago and cut my hair. I'm getting married in next year, and she wants to come to the wedding. And my fiance is down with it. Wow. Like, what could go wrong with that? But it just shows the power of the program that, I can have my ex-wife and her husband over at the house, and it's all thanks to the program. We learn, what's important, what's not, and so I like to tell the guys who are going through divorces and broke and have credit card debt and all that stuff. There's one of us out there who's gone through whatever you're going through and can show you how to do it sober style.
Yeah. Do you find that you realize that about them after they've already been attracted to you? That's how it's been for me as a sponsor, is that a guy will ask me to sponsor him, and somewhere along the way I'll say yes, but it isn't until we start getting together and start working the steps that I start to realize just how much like me he is, or how much like him I am. Have you found that to be the case as well? Or do you seek out those guys?
I don't even know if I should say this. This is kind of bizarre, but seems like I seem to attract a lot of gay guys for sponsees, That and guys who are broke. Because I talked about my credit card debt. Most of us have that when we come in the program. But I feel like I have a lot to offer the men who have wives who are mad as hornets. Because me and my ex-wife, we almost rekindled. It was possible. Right. And so the program, I was talking to a guy the other day. I said, you just have to stay sober, work the steps, and let God take care of your wife and the kids. You have to trust that. I guarantee you it'll work out for the best if you just stay sober and work the steps. Guaranteed. No questions asked.
That's a process that you have to go through and you have to trust in. And the results are nothing short of phenomenal. That's been my experience. And are you still involved in the alumni group at the facility that you got sober at?
No, I'm no longer doing the men's luncheon. I had the pleasure co-chaired it for many years.
So the gifts of sobriety are materializing and have materialized over the course of your sobriety. You just mentioned one just now. You're going to be getting married as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The woman that you're marrying is, we like to believe that our spouses are really very, very supportive of our programs. Have you found that to be the case with your fiance?
Oh, my God. I could not have a bigger fan. I told her we're taking Randy to lunch on Sunday and then going to watch him pick up his 17th year chip on Sunday night. And she said, give him a kiss for me for getting you sober.
Cool.
And so I told her, he'd probably like to have it directly from you. But he's the best sponsor in the world. He's amazing. He listens exceptionally well.
Yeah, he does. I've had the opportunity to get to know him, and he's been through quite a bit himself over the course of his sobriety, and he really demonstrated some pretty exceptional coping mechanisms and tied them very closely to his participation in the program. We're getting ready to wrap up here. I just wanted to ask if there were any things that you could say to a newcomer who's kind of on the fence about Alcoholics Anonymous. What would you say to them?
I would say find a couple of people who have two things. One, great sobriety, and two, you find them very attractive as humans and spend as much time as possible with them. I wonder, Howard, you and I love the meetings. We love the fellowship. It's a joy. Wednesday night's my home group, and it's my favorite day of the week. I wake up happy Wednesday morning because it's right?
Yeah.
And I have friends who stopped working the program and have managed to stay sober, and they just don't enjoy the program like we do. They just don't enjoy it. And for me, I love the program. I enjoy the fellowship. I enjoy the men. Yeah. And so I perceive that perhaps some people just don't get that connection. And so my thought was like, I'm thinking out of the box here because obviously, get a sponsor, work the steps is the answer. But if you, I think sometimes maybe if you can find some people you really click with, who you're attracted to, have great sobriety, and then just spend a lot of time with them, become really close with them, and develop some really close friends in the fellowship. Yeah. Life is a we deal. This program's a super we deal, and we can't do it I guess you could do it by yourself. It wouldn't be any fun if you could. Even if you could, why? Life is more fun when we do it together. Yeah. It's the good and the bad, the ugly, everything. We do it together. Yeah, it's just so beyond amazing.
That's so well said. And what you're talking about, Ernie, is the intersection between the fellowship of the program and the fellowship of the Spirit, and how through other people I am able to connect with a power greater than myself by virtue of the relationship of love and mutual respect and understanding and tolerance and consideration for other men who have the same disease as I have, who have the same challenges and foibles, and who enjoy the same opportunities, enjoying their lives as anybody can who does work the steps of the program. So I think that's a terrific attitude to have. When you're talking to somebody who's on the fence, to say, find the people and stay close. I always say, if you don't come back to AA for yourself, come back for the other people, because your presence, newcomer, is so important for the people sitting in that room to feel, as long as they want to feel grateful about the gifts of the program. So you're an extraordinary example, I think, of a man who's work this program to the fullest. I see you residing in the middle of it, too. That's the cool thing. Whenever I see you, I never wonder, well, I wonder how Ernie's doing, because your program is reflected just in the way that you are. And I see it whenever I see you, and it always brings a smile to my face when we run into each other. I love you, and I'm so glad to have you as a friend and a fellow trudger on the road of happy destiny. And this has been amazing for you to be able to sit here with me, talk about our respective lives and sobriety. And I can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Howard. And I love you and want to compliment you. One of the things you did for me in those first days is you remembered my name. You talked to me with love and respect. You made me feel like I was, one of the guys in the fellowship. From day one, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like, I knew you were like well-loved and connected. And since you loved me, I felt safe. Like if Howard's hugging you, you're in. It went a long way. And, I observed that. That's, I really appreciate how you embrace all of us men, every last one of us. It's a special gift. Thank you.
Thanks, Ernie. Well, my friends, that's a wrap for this episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you help me spread the word by sharing it with your fellow AAs? And if you can leave a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it'll help others find us more easily. Of course, you can listen to all of the interviews on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other podcast providers. Or tell Siri, Google Assistant, or Alexa, play AA Recovery Interviews podcast. Or visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, to listen to every interview, share your comments, and also contact us. If you want to email me directly, it's howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.